Holy smokes, these weeks go fast, don't they? So glad to have you back here again at Grey Ghost Vineyards. It's 5:15, so you know what that is. It's go time. Waiting for, here comes our check-ins. Hey, Stacy, I bet you got the house white. Hi, Caitlin. So a little shout out to my girl, Caitlin. She was my flower girl 20 years ago, and she was supposed to get married last night. It has been postponed. Let's do hearts out for Caitlin today, who's having a very different wedding weekend than she thought. We'd like to say thank you to everybody who opened reserved cabs last weekend. You guys are crazy. 04, 07, 15, we were so jealous. I'm gonna give you all a little bit of a fun fact here. So Al and Cheryl watch the whole thing after we do this. So they do see who all is checking in, right? So they love having you here. And also want to let you know that they are gonna try to respond to all your questions from last week. So first of all, we really want to thank everybody who responded to our news last week about Grey Ghost shipping now. As you can see, Cheryl spent this week personally returning everyone's phone calls. And if you call this week, no need to worry, she will be right on that. We would ask if you would give 72 hours for her to respond to you. And all right, and we are back again with the Happy Half Hour starring Al and Cheryl Kellert, owners and winemakers.
Are we on?
Yes, we are rolling.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us for our fourth Happy Half Hour at Grey Ghost. Once again, we're coming live from the Grey Ghost Studio 1. Many of you know this as the Mosby Lounge. One of the things we wanted to make abundantly clear today was that these programs are designed to build relationships. We feel that all of you out there are part of the family, and we don't want to commercialize this. So our intent here is to make this something that's very special among all of us without being so cheap as to commercialize it. Now, what I'd like to do is start off, of course, with a little humor. Now, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that the pandemic is over and we're now allowing to go into a restaurant. Well, this gentleman goes in and the waitress comes up to him and says, "Sir, can I help you?" And he said, "Yes, I'd like a quickie." She immediately slaps him in the face and walks away. A few seconds later, a second waitress comes up and said, "Sir, can I help you?" And he said, "Yes, I'd like a quickie." She again slaps him in the face and walks away. Finally, a third waitress comes up and says, "I notice you're having a problem with our other two waitresses. May I help you?" And he said, "Yes, all I want is a quickie." She immediately slaps him in the face and walks away. A few moments later, a gentleman who is sitting right next to him leans over and says, "It's pronounced quiche." Once again, it's very important to remember building relationships. What I'd like to do now is pass it over to Cheryl and let her give you a little bit of a background and some of the exciting and wonderful new things that have happened at Grey Ghost this week. Once again, I could not have said it better. Now tonight, Cheryl and I are enjoying the 2018 Seyval Blanc. Seyval is a grape that's known as a French-American hybrid, developed up at Cornell University as a grape that grows a little bit better on the East Coast. This is where you're going to find this particular varietal of fruit. The Seyval is kind of a cross between a Sauvignon Blanc and a Pinot Grigio. We produce it as a very dry, crisp-styled wine, fermented and aged in Hungarian oak. The reason we use Hungarian oak is it's so tightly grained that it really doesn't impart a lot of flavor to the wine. So you're basically allowing this wine to breathe in the barrel for about 5 months prior to it being removed, filtered, and bottled. We're enjoying the 2018, a wine that goes very nicely with oysters, your lighter seafoods, and your lighter poultry dishes. Once again, it's important to remember, always drink with 2 glasses. This keeps your hands away from your face. Now that we have our wines poured, let's give you a little, oh my gosh, Al, what a fool. There, now all hands are on deck. Now let's take a real quick peek at what's happened in the vineyard. It wasn't all good this past week. If you remember, last week we were very excited about the fact that we had dodged the frost. Unlike last week, this week we were hit hard. The frost came totally unexpectedly. No one knew it was hitting, and we ended up losing between 90 to 95% of the primary buds in the Chardonnay. It didn't seem to affect any of the other varietals, but the Chardonnay crop is definitely going to be hurt in the 2020 vintage. The verdict is still out about how badly it is. We'll know probably in about another week or two whether the top of the hills where the Chardonnay was planted did all right. As a result, there was no vineyard spraying. There's no use in going out and spraying a vineyard that doesn't have any green growth. The other thing that happened this past week, we began bud brushing. And what basically that amounts to is knocking the buds off the trunks so that the primary growth will develop on the vine. Now, do I have any questions out there?
Yes, Jonathan Carpenter asked, if the Hungarian oak doesn't impart much flavor, why not just use stainless?
Good question. The main reason is we want this wine to have an opportunity to breathe while it's aging. And a stainless steel tank basically is inert, so you have no growth in that wine. If you put it into oak, it will soften it slightly, but also give the wine the ability to aerate a little bit and therefore give it a softer finish. Now, another question that came up, and I'll respond to it right now, is what is the impact of the mild winter? Again, time will tell. It seems like every year something new happens to us, and this year we had a winter that was so mild it caught us totally off guard. So we'll be very anxious to see what impact this has on Grey Ghost. Now, some of the other questions that came up, and what we're going to try to do, respond to them now, is go through these questions and answers. Joe from Amosville, he was asking, are you still allowing pickups on your orders? Yes, the answer is absolutely. We also are shipping in Virginia now, also to some of the other states that allow for shipping. And of course, local people, if they want to, if it's within reason, we will deliver the wine personally. Jeff from Leesburg asked about the quality of the 2018s. I know it was a tough year. We're very pleased with what we're getting out of the vineyards. Some of the wines that we're drinking even right now is an 18. In fact, our Seyval is the 18 and just pouring delightful. Lynn from Florida, he asked, what's the oldest wine in the library and is it still pourable, still drinkable? It's the 1993 Reserve Cabernet, and to answer your question, yes. One of the things we've done is put together a library menu, which allows people, if they're interested, to purchase library wines. So the next time you're in, or if there's a particular wine you're interested in, be sure you give us a call and we'll let you know if it's available and what the prices would be. Are there any questions?
Yes, our dear friend Kristen is asking, would you consider making a Viognier?
No. No. Viogniers, We were at the conference when it was announced that the Viognier was going to be the Virginia wine. And they mentioned that more grapes were planted in Virginia than in France. I looked at my wife Cheryl and went, duh? Doesn't that tell you something? Viognier is not the easiest grape to grow. It's not a grape that produces high quantities of grapes, and as a result, the price is almost prohibitive when you're producing a wine. So we are not intending to plant Viognier, but a very good question. Now, Don from Virginia asked, what's the hardest part of winemaking? And we really thought about this, and quite frankly, the hardest part comes with the quality of the fruit in the vineyard and how Mother Nature treats us during the course of a year. Other elements are the temperature control, the cleanliness, and the monitoring of the aging of the wine in the winery. So it's really a very complex question, and one that is answered each year slightly differently based on what we're getting out of the vineyard. Let me see, this is Jim and Jane. How are the wines getting their medals? That was a good question because we're very proud of the fact we produce wines that earn multiple medals during the course of a year. After you've been a winery for a while, you'll be invited to participate in very large international and national competitions. Once you've developed a reputation, these competitions give you the opportunity of measuring your wine against some of the great wines in the West Coast, and basically we use it as a way of monitoring our quality. The judging is done differently, but basically it's a flight. Each wine is compared based on what it's supposed to taste like, its characteristics, its quality, its color, and then finally the judging is completed and your medals are awarded. Most of the time is based on a numerical scale. So when you receive a medal, it is indication that that wine definitely is quality, and the judging, who are professional judges, have viewed it as something worthwhile. I see there possibly is another question.
Yes, and also Jim and Jane, no, we do not go. We ship the wine. Jane Hunt, I'll let you know real quick, the library wine list is available in the tasting room, but not yet on the internet. Sherry from Pennsylvania had another good varietal question. She says, I know that some Virginia wineries have experimented with Norton. What are your thoughts on that?
Norton's a very unique grape. It actually originated in Virginia. And during the period of time when alcohol was basically prohibited, it was basically lost in Virginia and resurfaced in Missouri and was brought back by Hortons, and it was known as the Horton Norton. So he was the one that reintroduced it into Virginia. The Norton grape is a very distinct, powerful grape, producing some very powerful wines and wines that require a great deal of aging. Some of the best Nortons we've tasted are being made into brandy. But it is one grape that right now we don't have any intention of getting into, but it'll be an interesting grape to follow. Again, it's not one that has got a lot of name recognition, so it'll be interesting to see if it is ultimately taken up. Yes, another question.
Kellen Murray would like to know, does Al have one overall favorite year of the Cabernet, since we know he loves it since he started the winery?
Not one, but many. I loved the 93. I thought it was a great year. The 98 was incredible. The 2004 was amazing. And then we had a whole string of them. The 14, 15, and 16 just blew our socks off. We were really proud of those. The 17 is developing gorgeously. Of course, there will not be an 18. And I can assure you the 19, in about another 3 years when it's released, is going to just be dynamite, because 19 was one of the greatest growing seasons we've ever had in Virginia. Another question that Sherry from Pennsylvania asked was, what was the greatest challenge? And Cheryl and I wrestled with that one during the course of the week. And basically, it comes down to this. We were one of the first wineries in Virginia, and basically, we didn't know what Virginia could do. Initially, the industry tried to duplicate California, but we learned over time that Virginia is not California, and you cannot produce the same type of wine and the same characteristics that you can out in California. So once we identified the fact that we have to have our own identity, it gave us the ability to start producing Virginia wines that were truly Virginia wines. And that's where we're making the best of what we are given and therefore are able to pass that on to the consumer. Our wines are very distinct from the West Coast, much fruitier in style with a slightly lower alcohol level that you're going to get in California. Are there any other questions that you can think of right now?
I think we're doing pretty well.
Okay, we've got one other item. PJ sent some questions that I thought were really interesting about filtering. Number one, do I filter Grey Ghost wines? All whites are filtered, reds are not. Why and why not filter? Well, the reds we don't filter, we allow the fining to be actually done in oak, therefore giving us a higher quality wine and not stripping it of color. Why filter the whites? We want them to sparkle. We want them to be as crystal clear as a diamond. And for that reason, we do filter our white wines. The type of filtering used, we use a very, very high quality filtering designed for the pharmaceutical companies. They're called cartridge filters, and they filter the wine so it's crystal clear. At the same time, it does not add or distract flavor from the whites. The last part of the question was, what do other wineries use? At a final filter, a lot of wineries do use the cartridge filter, but there's other methods of filtering, such as plate and frame, pad filtering, and DE or diatomaceous earth. All of those are normally considered rough filters. So we don't use any of those. There is a chance that you can add a characteristic that's not appropriate to that particular wine by using those type of filters, so we strictly stay with the cartridge. Now we're going to go to a new section that we just recently started. Since we have the time, we are able to do a lot more research than normal. And one of the things Cheryl and I did all week this week was research the optimum amount of wine you can pour in a glass. What we found is that if you don't pour the glass really full, then Cheryl and I found ourselves fighting for the bottle. So that was a definite downside for not pouring full. If you pour it too full, we found that it's best you don't wear white clothes. If it's a red and you're swirling, it does have a tendency to get on your blouses or shirts. So there has to be a medium on how full to pour the glass. And what basically Cheryl and I figured out, and our basic conclusion after a full week, is we really can't remember. So this research is going to continue. I think over time we should be in a good position to get a little bit better understanding of how full to pour your glass. Any questions?
Well, Stacy Tiley really appreciated that great research. I have two follow-up filter questions. Jonathan is asking, what is the pour size of the filter? And Kristen is asking, what does filter mean?
On the pour side, when I'm doing the primary filter, it's a 1.0 micron filter, which means it's capable of taking out actually the coronavirus, which can be as small as 1.0 microns. When I go to a final filter, which is classified sterile, I use a 0.45 micron filter, which is now taking out anything that could be remotely even invisible to the human eye, such as bacteria or anything that could contaminate the wine. That filter is done twice, once prior to bottling and once at bottling. So as the wine is running through into the bottler, which has been sterilized by ethanol alcohol, the wine itself is being sterilized through a filtration. Filtering, the definition of filtering is to take any contaminants out of a liquid. And that's why when you're having a well, you'll often have a filtering system on your water that can take out any sediment that may be coming out of your well. Basically, that's what we're doing with the wine.
Carrie Horvath, thank you. She just said we should win a medal for this show. That was really nice. Thank you, Carrie.
Well, now it's time to go into part 2 of the history of Al and Cheryl. Okay, now if you remember, last week we went to the first date. Now what we're going to do is cover a little bit of time between our first date and our graduation from college. We dated for about 2 years, and Cheryl graduated in 1969 in journalism and immediately went to work for the Springfield Journal-Register as a reporter staff writer in what today would be known as the style section. It should also be noted that she, during the summer, was working in detasseling, which means that she was working in the cornfields, picking the tassels off of the corn. When I went to visit her one summer, she made a point of wearing a white dress. You would not have believed her tan. Coming from a family that doesn't believe in tanning, it was quite a shocker. Al ended up graduating in 1970 in chemistry. And instead of going into the workforce as a chemist, he decided to be drafted by the U.S. Army during the Vietnam conflict. I should throw in one other thing about 1969. That was when Al finally turned 21, and Cheryl bought him his very first legal drink. This was in July 20, 1969. If anybody remembers, there was one other event that seemed to get the headlines, and that was when man stepped on the moon. Quite frankly, to me, that should have been a sidebar, but I understand the public. Also should be noted that in 1969, in June of 69, was when Al started making wine. So that was the beginning of what now is Cheryl and my wine industry. Oh, by the way, my draft number was 159. We dated throughout the Army and when it became absolutely certain there was no chance that I would be in Vietnam, that's when the engaged couple decided to get married and got married on November 27th, 1971. And that was the beginning of this life. Now, what we're going to do next week is look at the post-Vietnam, early married life of the Kellerts. And quite frankly, there's some really interesting things about them, but we're not going to get real personal because this is on public network. Do I have another question here?
Yes, so first of all, Carrie is commenting about how you have a cougar, which if you don't know that, Dad means an older woman. Look, Mom knows what that means.
Shame on you.
She said, shame on you. But Paula Dickinson wants to know, what is a Saluki?
A Saluki is an Egyptian dog. It's related to the greyhounds. And it's one of the most beautiful dogs you can ever imagine. We're very, very proud to be a Saluki. Quite frankly, it was some of the most greatest emblems. It kind of beats the gobbler, but such is life. We'll also be a gobbler since I came out of Virginia Tech as a master's degree. Any other questions?
No, I think we're doing good right now.
Well, it's time for fun facts about gray ghosts. Now, if you remember, last week we talked about starting the vineyards and the work that went into planting and also beginning to purchase the equipment. Now we're going to fast forward to July 9th, 1994. That was the opening day of Grey Ghost. There were 4 people in the tasting room. And the tasting room was the front part of a barn. It was Cheryl, Amy, Angie, and yours truly, me. If you can imagine this, everybody hid behind Cheryl when the first customer walked in. We pushed her kind of out into the open where she got to produce or actually present our wine. And you notice I said singular, wine. We had one wine on the table. It was the Vidal, the 1993 Vidal. Cheryl poured that Vidal to the first customers, and after she poured it, she waited a moment and said, "Would you like to taste it again?" Of course, the people had no concept of whether or not to say yes or no, so she poured it again. Surprisingly enough, we had our first sale. Immediately, the three of us who were standing behind the table hiding nominated her to be the salesperson of the day and continuously pushed her out into the tasting room where she continued to serve our wine, singular, and multiple tastings. That day we had record sales of probably close to maybe $20 or $30, and it took us months before we finished our first book of receipts. By the way, we still use the same receipt book, as many of you will attest.
Right, Jeff Tiley?
Does anyone have any questions about that?
Sherry from Pennsylvania is asking if Amy is the only child you have in the business.
Absolutely not, no. We also have our son Al, and to give you some indication of his involvement, he is a professional firefighter, a lieutenant at the Prince William County Fire Department. When he's not there, he's here. When he's not here, his wife Becca is here. So we have Amy and Al, both very much involved. Amy works primarily in the marketing, the sales side, and as you can see, our production manager for these delightful programs. Al is a little on the quieter side, working in the background in operations, vineyard management, and ground management. So, and then of course Becca is our bubbling daughter-in-law, who when she's here, we just love to throw her out to the customers because she can just get along personally. I should also continue a little bit more about the history of Grey Ghost. The original winery was a stables, a 13-stall stable, which was converted to the winery through a lot of work by all four of us. In fact, Cheryl, as we mentioned earlier, did the painting. I did a lot of the brickwork. Amy did a lot of the work on the crush pad and inside, and of course Al was always there moving gravel, etc. The barrel room was the next major, I guess you'd call it development of the winery, and that was in 1999. We wanted to get it in 1999 so I would be able to say on my tours it was built in the last century, and so far that's worked. We actually completed the barrel room more in the 2000 time frame, but the government allowed us to move our barrels down in 1999 so the aging process could actually be done that year. We then did a renovation of the tank room in 2003, where we actually took the roof off the building, restabilized the building with concrete under each of the pillars, and then replaced the roof back on the building. When you're in the building, in the tank room, you're going to notice there's columns that are inside, each one representing a stall. There's absolutely no weight on each of those columns. All of the weight is carried on the outside of the building. Everything we did was to create quality. So the last phase of our construction was the tasting room, and that's where we are right now. Amy, is there any follow-up questions?
Yes. Carrie would like to know, does Big Al have any plans for more additions?
Yes and no. I'd love to, but we're doing a little bit of hesitation here because we have to see whether or not it would be worthwhile to do. And that advance or that addition does not include a champagne house.
And then I had a question early on. Did you jump up and down when you got that first sale?
All three of us
Hell
did.
yes.
Yeah, and I was beside myself. By the way, I should mention that we have been notified that that wine had won a medal about a week before we opened. So we actually had a medal on our very first wine prior to opening the winery in July of 1994. Well, I'll tell you, this has just been a wonderful program with you all. Once again, I think it's very important that you understand that this is not a marketing deal. We are strictly here to build relationships. And with that, I think it's time to tell our last joke before we call it a night. As many of you know, if you look back at 1971, Cheryl and I are rapidly approaching our 50th anniversary. And it just so happens that this last one deals with a couple who was married 50 years. The husband asked his wife, "Honey, have you ever cheated on me?" And she said, "I will honestly tell you yes 3 times. And he said, "Well, what was the first one?" Well, she said, "The first one was when you wanted to start your own business. And none of the bankers would even give you a loan because they didn't feel like you had the ability. So I slept with the bank president, and after that he gave you your first loan and you became a successful businessman." "You did that for me?" He said to his wife, "You're just incredible." "What was the second time?" "Well, the second time was when you were terribly sick and needed that surgery. And no surgeon would tackle it because they knew it was such a dangerous operation. So I slept with the surgeon. And as a result, he went ahead with the surgery, and that's why you're here with me today, alive and well." "Oh, honey, I can't begin to tell you how much I appreciate." "What was the third time?" "Well, the third time, remembers when you wanted to be president of the country club, and you were 52 votes short." Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. This has truly been a rewarding evening, and I hope you've all had a wonderful time.